I still remember the way the mist clung to the tree trunks that morning, thick as breath on glass. Nate and I had been planning that trip for months, a long weekend off-grid, deep in the Smokies, just two friends and a stretch of wild that didn't care what the rest of the world was doing. We both needed it. He'd just wrapped a messy breakup and I'd been burning out at work so hard I could almost smell the wires frying in my head. When we pulled off the gravel forest road and shouldered our packs, it felt like stepping into another time. The first day was easy going. Long ridges, chatter about old stories, our boots falling in rhythm on the trail. Nate was quieter than usual though. He'd brush it off with a joke or change the subject, but I caught him clutching his side more than once. I figured it was a pulled muscle or something he didn't want to complain about. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, the kind of scent that always made me think of starting over. By the time we reached the ridge camp, dusk had turned the forest violet. We built a small fire, the kind that barely gives off enough warmth to toast a hand, and cooked beans and rice over the coals. That's when I noticed him rummaging through his pack, like a man hiding from himself. He slipped something small into his pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't push. After all, everyone's got ghosts they'd rather not share out loud. The next morning, the trail pitched steeply downward into a hollow, and the fog hadn't burned off yet. Nate lagged behind, moving slow and pale. I told him we should rest, but he waved me off. 10 minutes later, he slipped on a slick route and went down hard. I was beside him in a heartbeat. He wasn't out cold, but he was close. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. I yanked off his pack to lighten the load, and that's when I saw it. A small insulated pouch with vials inside. Medicine, lots of it. Some empty, some nearly full. "What is this, Nate?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. He looked at me, eyes unfocused, and finally said it. He'd been diagnosed a few months back. Some kind of rare heart condition. He was supposed to be monitoring it, taking doses, not climbing mountains and hauling gear into nowhere. The wind picked up then, scattering ash from last night's fire pit across the rocks. I remember thinking how fragile everything suddenly felt. The trail, the trees, even our friendship. I got him sitting up, fed him water and tried to think. We were 12 miles from the trailhead, no signal, no easy way out, and Nate was getting worse by the minute. That was when I heard the low hum of an engine somewhere below the valley. Rescue wasn't an option yet, but there was a ranger station near the river, maybe 2 hours hike if I moved fast. I looked at Nate, slumped against his pack, and I knew leaving him alone could mean losing him, but staying meant both of us might not make it. I remember kneeling beside him, the forest so quiet, I could hear the faint tick of his watch. Nate's face had gone grey, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the chill. He was trying to joke between shallow breaths, something about dying in a postcard, but his voice cracked halfway through. I told him to save his strength, though my own voice shook worse than his. I wanted to be calm for him, but my mind was spinning through every bad possibility. No signal, no one else on the trail, and a friend whose heartbeat seemed to flutter like a trapped bird. I tried my phone anyway, waving it around like a fool in the fog. Nothing, just that merciless no service staring back. The ranger station was miles away, but at least it was downhill. I remembered a small creek we'd passed an hour back. If I followed it, I might hit the valley faster. Still, I couldn't leave Nate completely alone. I built him a small shelter out of the tarp and branches, close enough to the trail that anyone might spot him, and left him the emergency whistle, water, and the rest of the medicine. He gripped my arm hard before I left. "Don't take long," he rasped. "I won't," I said, though I had no idea how long it would really take. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. The fog had thickened, and the trail markers were faint. My boots slipped on damp leaves, every sound around me loud as thunder, the trickle of water, the whisper of trees. I moved as fast as I could, half jogging, half sliding down the switchbacks. Every so often I'd stop, listening for the sound of Nate's whistle, but all I heard was wind moving through branches. An hour in, I caught movement behind me. Quick, deliberate. I froze. "A bear!" My pulse thudded so loud I almost couldn't hear anything else. Then a voice. "Hey!" It was a park ranger, a woman in green, carrying a radio and looking as startled as I was. She'd been checking the lower camps after reports of a downed tree near the river. When I told her about Nate, she was already pulling her pack off her shoulders, keying the mic on her radio. Static, then a voice crackling back. I felt my knees go weak with relief when she said backup was on the way. We started up the trail together, moving fast, though the climb felt twice as long as before. The ranger kept asking me questions, his symptoms when he'd collapsed, what medication he had. But when I told her the name on one of the vials, she stopped cold. That's not something he should be taking without a doctor monitoring him, she said. It can thin the blood dangerously if the dosage is off. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I thought of all the times Nate had brushed off his fatigue, the way he'd hidden those vials. He hadn't just been sick, he'd been self-medicating, probably against orders. The thought hit me harder than the climb itself. By the time we neared the ridge again, the fog was burning off. Sunlight slicing through the trees in narrow gold beams, but my heart was pounding too hard to notice the beauty of it. The clearing where I'd left him was just ahead. I could already see the corner of the tarp. "Nate!" I shouted, breaking into a run. No answer. And then, as I reached the shelter, I saw the trail of disturbed leaves, the scuffed prints heading downhill, and the tarp flapping, empty. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty tarp, as if the air itself might explain where he'd gone. The fog had lifted into thin streaks between the trees, but the woods still felt strange, too quiet, like they were holding their breath. The ranger was a few steps behind me, scanning the ground with the calm precision of someone who'd seen panic before. "He's moving downhill," she said, crouching to study the prints. "Dragging one leg a little. That's good. Means he's still on his feet." Good wasn't the word I would have used. My chest felt hollow, the way it does right after bad news, before your brain decides how to react. Nate was out there alone, sick and maybe delirious, heading toward a river that could swallow him in a heartbeat. I grabbed my pack, slung it over one shoulder and followed the tracks without waiting for permission. The ranger didn't argue, just fell in behind me, radio in hand. The forest grew steeper as we descended. The ground slicked with moss, roots twisting like veins underfoot. Every few minutes I'd call his name, my voice bouncing off the trees and coming back thin and distant. Once I thought I heard an answer, faint, like a groan carried on the wind, but it was impossible to tell if it was him or just the creek below. We reached the stream, where the trail narrowed between two rock walls. The water was shallow, cold enough to sting my skin through the boots. And there, half hidden by a cluster of ferns, was his pack. The zipper was open, medicine scattered in the mud like spilled marbles. One vial had shattered, leaving a bright streak of liquid that looked like blood until you realised it gleamed differently in the light. The ranger knelt beside it, radioing our coordinates again, her tone shifting from calm to urgent. I felt useless, just standing there with the sound of rushing water filling the silence. Then I saw him, further downstream, slumped against a fallen log. "Nate!" I waded in before she could stop me, boots filling with icy water. He looked up as I reached him, eyes dull but aware. There was blood on his chin. He'd bitten his lip, or maybe worse, but he managed a crooked smile. "Told you not to take long," he murmured. I dropped to my knees beside him, checked his pulse, still there, but weak. "You shouldn't have moved," I said. "You scared the hell out of me." "Didn't want to die up there alone," he said simply. Then he looked toward the ranger, who was kneeling to check his vitals. "Guess the secret's out, huh?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "You could have told me?" He looked away, toward the water shimmering in the afternoon light. "Didn't want pity," he whispered. "Didn't want you cancelling the trip because of me. I just wanted one more good weekend." I didn't know what to say to that. The truth of it hit hard, heavier than the backpack still clinging to my shoulders. He'd come here chasing a bit of normal, and now we were standing on the edge of something far from it. The ranger pressed a bandage against his arm where he'd fallen, then looked at me. "Helicopter's on its way," she said. "We just need to keep him talking." So we did. We talked about anything. Old camping trips, stupid jokes from college, the first time we'd gotten lost together and blamed each other for it. He smiled through the pain, eyes half closed, until the faint thump of rotor blades began to echo down the valley. That sound, distant, metallic, growing closer, was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. The helicopter came in low, wind thrashing through the trees like a storm. The ranger signalled with her orange vest, and I shielded Nate's face as dust and leaves whipped around us. When the skids finally touched down on a patch of river gravel, 2 medics jumped out and moved fast, checking his pulse, threading tubes, reading numbers off machines that sounded out of place in that wild setting. I stood back, soaked from the knees down, trembling from adrenaline and cold. Nate looked so small then, the guy I'd hiked with through thunderstorms, who once carried me 10 miles after I twisted an ankle, now lay on a stretcher, pale as birch bark. He caught my eye as they secured him. "Guess I ruined the trip," he said weakly. "Shut up," I told him, trying to smile. "You just made it unforgettable." The ranger gave me a nod before climbing in beside him. The rotors flared again, beating the air into a frenzy, and I had to turn away as they lifted off, vanishing above the trees. Then there was nothing, no noise, but the river gurgling over stones and the wind sighing through the pines. I stood there a long while, watching the ripples where my friend had just been. The pack he'd left behind was still half open, vials rattling softly inside. One was labelled with a warning sticker, red and bright against the mud. I didn't know what half the words meant, but I knew they were dangerous. Dangerous in the wrong hands, dangerous without trust. Eventually, I started back up the trail, moving slower this time. The climb was brutal, and the silence left me alone with thoughts I didn't want. I kept replaying every sign I'd ignored. His quietness, the fatigue, the way he'd always kept his pack close. He'd told me once that the hardest part of being sick was feeling like people treated you differently. Maybe that's why he hid it. Still, I couldn't shake the sting of it. Friendship's supposed to mean carrying the load together, not pretending you're fine until you collapse. By the time I reached camp, the light was gone. The fire pit was cold, and our tent sagged under the dew. I sat down by the ashes, listening to the forest breathe, trying to figure out what I felt. Anger, worry, guilt, all tangled together. I found the mug he'd used that morning, still half full of coffee gone stale. I poured it out into the dirt. Somewhere up above, the stars had come out sharp and clear, as if the sky itself didn't care what happened below. I leaned back and watched them until my neck hurt. Funny thing about those woods, they make you feel small, but they also make you see what really matters. In the morning, I hiked out slow, packed lighter than before. The ranger met me at the trailhead, her uniform dusty and her expression tired. "He made it," she said simply. Stable, but it was close. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Relief hit so hard it almost knocked me down. She said he'd asked for me, that I could see him once they moved him to a hospital in town, but I wasn't sure what I'd say when I did. As she drove me down the dirt road toward the ranger station, I looked out at the trees fading into morning mist and thought about the secrets people carry, the ones that keep them alive and the ones that nearly kill them. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the small mountain hospital, backpack still dusty, boots still streaked with river mud. The world felt strange after being out there, too bright, too loud, too civilized. The smell of antiseptic replaced pine and smoke, and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence where wind used to be. I hesitated in the hallway, half afraid of what kind of Nate I'd find inside. He was propped up in bed when I entered, a few monitors beeping softly beside him. The colour had come back to his face, though his eyes still looked heavy. When he saw me, a faint grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You look terrible," he croaked. I let out a breath I didn't realise I'd been holding. "Yeah, well, I had to drag your sorry self halfway down a mountain." "You owe me a beer." He chuckled weakly, and the sound loosened something in my chest. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he said, quieter, "I didn't mean for it to go like that. I just wanted one more trip before things got complicated." I pulled a chair closer. "You could have told me, Nate. I wouldn't have said no." He looked away toward the window where sunlight cut thin stripes across the blanket. That's exactly why I didn't. You would have treated me different. Maybe cancelled the trip. I wanted to feel normal for a while. I didn't think it'd get that bad. I didn't have an answer right away. There's no easy way to tell a man you're furious and grateful for him in the same breath. Finally, I just said, "Next time, no secrets, all right?" He nodded slowly. "Next time." We talked a while longer, about the ranger who'd saved us, about how he'd scared a nurse by insisting his IV bag was bear-proof, about nothing at all, really. Before I left, he asked me to hand him his pack, which sat on the chair. I did, but not without hesitation. He reached in and pulled out one last vial, the last of his medicine. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it on the nightstand. "I'll let the doctors handle it from now on," he said. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon light had turned golden, spilling through the trees that lined the parking lot. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of pine sap, and for a moment I could almost pretend I was back in camp with the crackle of fire and the rustle of night all around. On the drive home, I thought about how easily trust can splinter, how even the strongest friendships can be tested by silence. But I also thought about how it can mend like bone, stronger at the break. Weeks later, when Nate was cleared to travel again, he sent me a message. "Same trail next spring?" I stared at it for a long time before replying, "Yeah, but this time you carry the first aid kit." And I could almost hear his laugh, bright and real, echoing through the trees. The mountains keep their secrets, sure, but I think we learned not to. Not anymore.